Welcome to Living Well with Dr. John, Adjustment Through the Lifespan. Today's topic is part 3 of Dr. John's Relationships, Intimacy, and Sexuality series. Before we start, I'm going to read the webinar disclaimer. Please be advised this topic of relationships and sexuality can be a highly sensitive and graphic conversation. There may be opinions and comments that can be difficult or uncomfortable to hear. The opinions expressed during this podcast may not express the views and beliefs of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. Now for some background on Dr. John. Dr. John Chang is a clinical neuropsychologist and is board certified in rehabilitation psychology. In addition to having his own private practice, Dr. Chang is a professor of psychology at East Stroudsburg University and a consulting psychologist for both Lehigh Valley Health Network, Pocono Medical Center, and Good Shepherd Rehabilitation Hospital. Two quick notes before we start. To ask Dr. John Chang a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Also, please check out the chat box throughout the webinar for different resources or any comments that we have. Now I'm going to turn it over to John. Hi, John.
Hey, Kaylee. Thank you for the intro, as always. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone out there. I know there's people in different parts of the country and maybe even a few people internationally. I'd like to say hello. Feels like it's been a while since I spoke to you last. I'm going to start off by thanking the foundation, as always, in putting these podcasts up. I'm so grateful that the foundation thinks that this is important. I'd like to thank Angela for keeping me in line and make sure I'm focused on what we offer to you. And as always, Kaylee, my go-to person, she makes sure that I'm actually doing what I'm supposed to do when I'm on these podcasts. As for those listeners out there today, I want to make sure that, one, let us know what you really want to hear, how I'm doing in the Q&A while I'm talking, or send us an email, tell us how we're doing and what you'd be interested in us hearing us talk about in future podcasts. With your feedback, it allows me to really tailor to the information that I believe that you want. In addition, just let us know if we're doing well. Let others know if you do like us. Let other people know that this is happening every month, and because the goal is to keep you informed, and gives us an opportunity to do that for you. Now we are going to give part 3 of Living Well with Dr. John on relationship, intimacy, and sexuality. My initial thoughts were only 2 parts, but there are just so many questions that and such a high demand on understanding this process. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense why there's such a high demand, because ultimately, I believe this is really the meaning of what life is about. As a gerontologist, and most of my patients, I'm a rehab psychologist. I'm also a gerontologist. And for anyone that's over 85 in my private practice, I always used to ask them, what is the meaning of life? You've lived most of your life now. What is the meaning of life? And most of the time, they would say it's relationship and people around you. So I can see why this is important. I can see why everyone now, it makes it even harder having a spinal cord injury to have these things. It definitely does. And I like to, before I even go into some of those questions, before you go into some of these, I'm going to talk about some common themes about relationships that I noticed that was prevalent in the questions that were sent to me. And so I'm going to just talk about a few of the common themes. But one common theme I noticed in the questions that we'll talk about a little bit more specifically, now this is just in general, is that will there be someone that can see beyond my disability? We are all afraid of being rejected. Can you find love when you are in a wheelchair? The answer is yes, but the process of getting there is incredibly hard. It is hard enough. It is hard enough to find somebody when you're not in a wheelchair. I've seen so many clients that they're on divorce number 4. I have a client right now that's on her 4th marriage. And my question is, now, did you know that if you get divorced once, the more likely of you being divorced the second time actually goes up? And then for the 3rd time, it goes even higher. So what does that tell you? That tells you that most people don't really learn from their mistakes, and they keep making their mistakes. And that's why divorce is even higher after that. But with a disability, yes, you need to find somebody that can see beyond your disability. Divorce rates are up when you have an injury. We know that if you're married and one of the partners having an accident, the likelihood of being divorced is high. Can there people see you beyond? Absolutely. Absolutely. Are they difficult to find? Yes. Where can you find them? Would be another question. Well, I have to say, I might have said this in the other month. If you want to find someone that really already can understand you and your disability, it is nice to actually date people who are in the healthcare system, healthcare world, in a rehab setting. When I played quad rugby for Philadelphia way back when I was in my 20s, I remember who were the volunteers that helped us. It was OT, it was PTs, it was nurses, it was all these individuals who were excited about the program and wanted to be there. And I also remember maybe half of them were dating half the people on the team. So I would say that would be probably the best place to find someone, is to be in the healthcare. Now, it doesn't mean you can't find someone out in the real world, but and every day as online, but you have to really make sure that you communicate well with these individuals. I had some questions about, well, when's a good time to talk about your disability? Well, your disability, which is maybe similar to mine, is obvious. It's physically in front of us. It's on their mind. They already know you have some form of physical limitation. It's very different. It's very different to date someone who with a physical disability than to date someone with a mental disability. You know, the question, I think it would be even harder at times when someone who has a mental disability, they say, well, when do I talk about it? When do I talk about it? And that's a hard one, because that could be hidden. You know, mental disabilities can be hidden fairly well if someone really knows how to cope with it. Whereas a physical disability, it's evident. They know going into it, it's there. Maybe they don't know how much or at what level, but it's there. So the opportunity now, granted, don't get me wrong. Don't talk about the first date, the first 10 minutes of meeting someone. You know, it's, you may not want to do that. You may want to get to know them a little better first. But after a few dates, yeah, I think because they're curious, they're going to want to know. And the more you open up about it, the better it is. Now, it's a little different for me when I teach. When I teach in college, I talk about the first day and I get it out of the way because I don't want my disability to affect any of my teaching, which is, I would say, a little different than developing a relationship with someone. You may wait a few dates after that. If you go back to one of my first talks, one of the areas that you have to be relevant is the fact that you have to accept some losses, meaning your relationships are not going to be like it used to be. It's definitely different than before your injury. And you have to come to terms with that. You have to accept the losses in both physically, sexually. It's all part of the injury. It's similar to TBI and my patients with stroke. You don't have a brain injury without some relevant effect. While you don't have a spinal cord injury with some relevant physical reaction. If it's arousal, erection, for women, it's not the erection, it's the lubrication, and for men, ejaculation. For both men and women, orgasms. So those, at some point in that sequence of, let me step back a little bit. Well, let me talk a little bit about that sexuality right off the bat. It is a dysfunction when any part of that intimacy into sexuality is impaired. So it could be in the beginning from interest to the end towards orgasm. So any part of that sequence when there is an impairment, that is considered a sexual dysfunction. Okay. Ultimately, when it comes to relationships, and for those who are newly injured or even been injured for a while, who's currently out in the dating world, your fear of rejection, that's another common theme. I don't want to be out there. I don't want to be rejected. Well, it's either you be out there and potentially find a mate, or you will be alone. And that is a scary concept, no matter who you are. I have people who are divorced and they're out in the dating world now, again, in their 50s and 60s. And they said, one of the biggest fears is to grow old by myself. So for everyone who's out there who don't have a disability, that is already a fear. With an injury, now that escalates. And am I going to be alone? Am I going to be rejected? That's a huge fear. So that's another common theme: fear, rejection, acceptance of loss, someone looking beyond my disability. So, all right. One of the things I wanted to also go back to, when it comes to summarizing, in the last few weeks, I've been having a UTI. I had a UTI, and why do I share this with you? It's because of this UTI, I had problems with my suprapubic and my catheter, and when that clogs up, I get autonomic dysreflexia, which I haven't had much of in the last year and a half, which I was grateful. I was healthy, and now with it coming back and having this UTI, my wife had to be around more often than not, because of, again, when I have this UTI, it gets clogged up and I have autonomic dysreflexia. And then, so I have to get this unclogged in order for the blood pressure to go down. And so that in itself is scary. Why am I sharing this? It made me again realize how important my wife is for my survival and my quality of life. And I'm grateful for the fact that I have someone in my next to my side that's willing to help me get through some of these struggles so I can't imagine people who don't have someone, like this, like a family member or a spouse that's right there with you, fighting the fight every day with you. So I want you to really, really find a way to be confident about who you are and an acceptance of your disability, and go out and find someone that could be critical in your survival and critical in your quality of life. Because just for me, just for that example, having to, rely on someone for these past weeks so significantly, it was to a point where I didn't even feel comfortable for her to leave for any period of time, because I was afraid I was going to have an autonomic dysreflexia episode. And that made me realize how fragile at times my life is. When I sit, and in the introduction, you notice that I consult at different hospitals, and I haven't been in a hospital ever since COVID started. I've been doing a lot of my work online. I've been fortunate though, that I did get the vaccine last week, 2 weeks ago, with the Moderna vaccine, and felt a little warm the next day, but other than that, didn't have too much side effect. I'm expecting to get the next shot in about 2 more weeks. But being ill also made me realize that without health, it doesn't matter what you do or how much you make. It does not matter. Without health, there is no wealth. And it's really critical that you keep yourself healthy, get the support around you that you need to stay healthy, hopefully, and to minimize the amount of stress. So I was seeing my private practice. I started seeing being on a program called Doctors on Demand. You might have heard about that with Dr. Phil. And so I used to see patients all over the country, and so I started limiting that as well, to focus on my quality of life and health. So those were some of the common themes that I thought I saw in the questions, and I wanted to go specifically. My goals are to go more in depth a little bit, and talk about some of the great questions. And I want to thank the listeners out there that are listening to that. You've given me some great questions to talk about, and I'm going to go over a few of them. Also, please, if you're responding to some of these questions or some of the things I'm saying, put them in the Q&A. I can answer them in my after I go over some of these questions. So here's one from Jen. Jen says, if I am out, I do happen to talk to some friends. To talk to someone. Friends will say he's flirting with you. My default answer is, it's pity. He feels bad that I am in a wheelchair. So that was put out by Jen. If I am out and I do happen to talk to someone, friends will say he's flirting with you. My default answer, it's pity. He feels bad that I am in a wheelchair. She also writes, I'm afraid to put myself out there. I haven't dated since injury about 3 years ago. What is your biggest fear? Jen writes, rejection because of my chair. Have you tried online dating as an option? And she writes, I haven't tried. I'm not sure if I can handle being passed over. Jen, it's been 3 years. I'm going to have to tell you, let's give it a go. It's even more scarier to have to live alone without support or some opportunity to have someone. I don't know how old you are. I don't know if you're I'm just basing on some general things that you are in a wheelchair. If it's not through yourself or some your own self-help books, please see a counselor. I'm biased, obviously, of counseling. Find a way to accept your limitations. As I stated in my first talk, you need to devalue your physicality and change the value in something else, something more controllable by you. You know, for me, it was to devalue my physical ability and enhance my intellectual. So going in a little more in depth about this, Jen, I would say, look, start by going to counseling. There's a lot of counselors that are available online at this point. My Doctors on Demand was an online program just for licensed psychologists, and I think there's social workers maybe even on there. So you can see someone without even leaving your house. And find a way to talk about your concerns and your fears. Is it harder than someone without a physical disability? Absolutely. But you know, what are the consequences? If you don't do this, you're going to still be in the same boat of being alone. So I'm going to say to you, go out there, give it a try. You know, another person similar, these are sort of categorized in a similar concept as Frank says. He writes, finding someone who looked beyond my disability, dealing with many aspects of my disability. You know, what is my fear? Well, dealing with many aspects of my disability. You know, like, how do you date anyone when you have to have all these medical requirements, all these physical requirements? I remember one time when I was dating a nurse way back in my 20s, when I was still in grad school. Now I'm an old man now, so this has been a long time. But I remember she lived in a second floor apartment with no elevator. And how do you, eventually she's going to want to have you in her apartment. And I literally had to be carried up all these flights of steps to get into the apartment. At times it was embarrassing in one point, but the other time is this person was excited to show me her apartment. She wanted me to see her apartment. So we found a way to get us up there, you know. So you have to find other ways to get around your limitations. So Nikki writes, how do I bring up my SCI and all that's go with it. Again, similar to what Frank was talking about. How do I to have someone deal with all the challenges beyond my disability? And Nikki writes, bring up my SCI and all that goes with it. I'm an incomplete and can walk. So for, everything's relative. So when I hear someone that can walk and that's incomplete, I'm like, oh my God, that's awesome. So that means you probably can go from chair to bed without an issue and bed to commode without an issue. And you probably can ambulate. So everything's always relative. But Nikki also writes, I've been seen as a worthless person or a freak. Have you tried online dating? She said, yes. What would you feel more confident dating and relationship? Being able to know how to bring up the subject. So going back to my first initial 5 minutes of my talk, I wouldn't talk about all the things you can't do, all the things you're afraid of in the first day of first time meeting someone. It reminds me of some of those rom-coms that I've seen in the past, romantic comedies, that the person meets someone for the first minute and then they say like, do you want children? How many? When do you want to get married? It's like, wow, you really don't want to address all those things right off the bat. It's like, oh yes, I'm in a wheelchair. Oh, by the way, I have a bowel program. I have a catheter program. I have spasticity. If we do that, no, don't get them to like you for who you are first. Get them to know your personality, that you're inquisitive, you're humorous, you're funny, you're interesting, all those good things. And if they still like you and want a second date, and maybe even a third date, and then you can start talking about, some of your concerns. Well, you can ask them, do you have, that's a good time to say, it's obviously I'm in a wheelchair. Do you have any questions for me about some of these issues that I may have, or some of the things you think I may have? So be open about it. Talk about it. Oh, my apologies. My little puppy's barking in the back. So, but that's what you get for working from home. I apologize. So don't talk about it right off the bat, Nikki. Keep it, just be yourself. Try to entice them with your beauty, your personality, your humor, and then talk a little bit about that a little later. So, let's go to another question here that I thought was really interesting. Lauren writes, I am a newly disabled with spinal cord injury last year. So Lauren, welcome. Wow, you're like only a year post-injury. To me, that seems forever. I remember when I was a year post-injury and I met someone that was 4 years injured. I said to myself, I remember specifically saying, wow, that's a lot of years being disabled. To be honest, at that time, I thought I wasn't going to be disabled that long. I thought I was going to recover. And 33 years later, now there's very few, although I've met a few though that has longer years. So I'm newly disabled, just injured, and don't know how to date. I have no confidence, she says, Lauren, and unfortunately, my husband has left me. I don't date online. I don't think someone would want me. I want to learn more. Lauren, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but ultimately, there will be and can be someone who will want you or love you as long as you can find a way to love yourself first. That is so true. You must, in the Western world here, the first thing you have to learn is to have to love yourself. And if it's that way through just your progression of, you're so newly injured, so you still have so much to learn and understand. And you may come and accept yourself, or you may have to do it through help of a professional. But once you get that sense of I am who I am, and I'm going to just put myself out there, all of a sudden people may show up. And it's unfortunate that your husband has left you. It's not uncommon for that to happen. Now, I noticed in one study, I was only able to find one research study that showed that for women, women don't get studied very much because it's such a smaller part of the population that gets injured. It's used still 20% out of the, and being that pregnancy for women, even with spinal cord injury, is an automatic, it's a process that can happen, so they don't write a lot about sexuality, intimacy for women. And I apologize. I don't even cover that as much as well because I don't get to see it too often. But you have to really learn to accept yourself. Once you do that and you put yourself out there and you're able to talk about it, the other facet of having intimacy and sexuality, the foundation would be communication, which is like any relationship, and willing to experiment, try different things, see what is interesting, see what's comfortable, see what you can adapt to make it interesting for each other. So communication and experimentation are the two areas that I would, be the underlying theme for a relationship. So Lauren, I'm sorry about your loss of a relationship, but try to get out there and be confident about who you are, and then put yourself out there. So those are just some of the common dating questions. Now, and then I'm going to go into sort of another phase of questions here. So let's see. Rachel writes, finally trusting someone with all aspects of an intimate relationship. What's her fears? That she fears safety. Okay. And she did try online dating and didn't like it. The funny thing about this, for many of the questions that people who are listening today, many of them are women, which I commend you. Women are always better attuned to relationships than men are, and they maybe see the value of this talk more than some men. But again, yes, you need to find someone that you can trust, that you feel safe, that when you go on dating, one person suggested when they're on dating sites, they said they put everything out there. They put their wheelchair out there. People obviously always want to know what happened. In a dating website, they're probably going to point that out fairly quickly. So you have to be ready to answer those questions. Maybe in person, when you meet someone in person, they may not ask that question right off the bat. But I usually bring that up fairly quickly when I meet someone. so that I let them know that I'm comfortable in talking about it, because it is a curiosity for them. So let's continue, because I want to try to cover as many questions, because there's so many questions, and I want to make sure I give some, and by giving you answers to some of these questions, I know some of the others may have the same issue. So Brandy writes, she says, what's the biggest challenge? She writes, feeling that I have to prove myself to compensate for my disability. That is an interesting one. Because I've always said in one of the classes, it's called Alderian Therapy, Alfred Adler, Alder. He writes that because he was so physically small and frail, but he was an intellect, he had to overcompensate for his lack of physical prowess with his intellect. And for me, I've always felt that I had to be more intellectual, more hardworking, and even maybe more personable than if I wasn't disabled, because I was compensating for my disability. Yeah, it's definitely there, Brandy. You want the stuff that's the best to shine, and the person need to really accept the good with the bad. And if you're just presenting all bad stuff, or all stuff that's not, I'm just going hypothetical. So say you're in a wheelchair, and you have you have a impulse control. Maybe you have a anger issue, or maybe you are incredibly shy, and you don't want to communicate, or have difficulty communicating. So you're bringing in, we all have baggage. So I don't know how many people are attracted to someone who have baggage in every area of their life. So I overcompensate by having maybe a little bit more of one area, and knowing that I have less of something else. Traditionally, opposites attract, but long-term relationships usually want similar values. But sometimes I've heard people say that with their physical limitations, and it's nice that they have someone that has other areas that compensates for them, and then therefore they have, they're good at other areas. So, but coming back to you is that, yes, will you be overcompensating, Brandy? I believe so. You more comfortable with yourself? Absolutely. She writes, confident with your self-worth. Yes, Brandy, you are on target. You need to get better at those areas. You need to be really good at some of those areas, because there are limitations to some of the things you're going to present. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit back to, so that's intimate. Those are relationships. Just having a relationship. Why you're having a relationship? Why do you need to search for a relationship? Having a relationship in your life with a spinal cord injury will enhance your quality of life. Absolutely. Having that support, having that someone near you, having that someone that understands your issues, absolutely will increase your quality of life. when it comes to intimacy, sexuality, again, there are several components to that. If you want to break it down scientifically, it is interest. You want to have sex. Is the arousal. Arousal is the ability to have an erection, the ability to have lubrication for women. It's the act of the intercourse. Can you have intercourse? A lot of men have erectile dysfunction. You have to compensate for that with some type of medication, some type of procedure. Uh, can you, for women, it's different. Intercourse is usually a lot easier as long as there's not issues of pain. And again, I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm telling you the psychological areas. The intercourse part can be a dysfunction. And then, of course, the ejaculation, the orgasm for women and men, those some may be impaired. There's impairments, all facets of that. And when you have sex with someone with spinal cord injury, you will have to deal with every one of those areas in some form or fashion. So you need to communicate, you need to experiment, you need to understand what you can and cannot do. Okay. Um, you know, Jean writes, having an incomplete spinal cord injury for 41 years. She has figured out most for 41 years with it, and she's an incomplete. She says she's gotten figured out most of the issues that she had to deal with. She did say that most of my topics are about males and not females, and she's correct. I apologize, Jean. I guess I'm as biased as most of the professionals out there. We tend to be biased towards the 80% instead of the 20%. And I want to say yes. For women, you have to be more concerned about the arousal part, the lubrication part. Yes, depending on your level of injury, being you're an incomplete, you cannot orgasm. And again, you need to communicate, talk to a professional, experiment. But a lot of professionals don't even talk about these areas because you know what? They're not exposed to it. They're not even comfortable talking about it, to be honest. And there's a few people in here on on this webcast that are professionals. And again, I so appreciate the fact that you are listening. Some like Cindy and Cindy and Susan out there who are part of the professional field, who's willing to take a time off from their busy schedule to listen to us. And I say to you, understand, listen to them empathically, hear them out, talk to them, let them know about the references and the resources you have. Talk about it out in the open so that they know it's open to talk about it. It's not something that has to be taboo. I try to talk about it as much as I can in a manner that is professional. And so I appreciate that, Cindy and Susan out there, Cindy Murphy and Susan Labar there. Thank you for listening today and giving our listeners some more information based on this podcast. Okay, so I addressed a few. I had so many, to be honest. There's so many questions. I wanted to ask Kaylee if there's any questions that has come up in our question and answer that I should talk about.
Hi, John. We've received a few questions and also a few comments so far in the chat box.
Sure.
Just a friendly reminder, if any of the attendees have any questions, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A box and we will go over them now. One of the first questions you've received so far is, just going back up, is what about sex with a long-term partner? Married or established a relationship and then the spinal cord injury. How to engage sex post-spinal cord injury.
Okay, can you repeat that again for me, please?
What about sex with a long-term partner? Married or established relationship, then the spinal cord injury. How to engage in sex post-spinal cord injury.
Well, I'm going to go back to my two common themes, that being that you have a partner and it's long term, you're already over the first two humps. You know, you have a partner and you have time. Two areas that has already you have gone over. You've jumped over the hurdles. There's some sense of commitment already there. Number three would be communicate your interest, communicate your desires, communicate your fears. Read about it as much as you can and what's available out there. And lastly, experiment within reason, as long as it doesn't do any harm, and talk to your professionals, but experiment and see and then recommunicate. What was interesting? What you like, what you don't like, what was interesting, and by through that, may be able to develop some sense of arousal, some interest, and some enjoyment from that. So, yeah.
The next comment that we received is, there are dating websites for people living with disabilities. That might be a nice place to start when feeling so much fear and insecurity. And then another person listed a few of the websites in our Q&A, which include dateable.org, eHarmony, enablelove.com, and Special Singles Online. There are also a few more if you'd like to check them out.
Wow. That's more than I knew. So that's great. That's great. What I do to think about dating, though, and again, in our last podcast, Kurt down in one of the co-host of the one of our Facebook websites, who have, like, I think 7,000 members there. He says that when he was on the dating site, he always posts pictures of him with the wheelchair. That's one. And two, he said, be aware of your own hygiene. He said that are two critical things that you can control right off the bat. Make sure you don't smell, make sure you're hygienic, make sure you have all the things clipped and closed and showered and all those things that make you, and that's not even talking about your personality and your great smile and all those things, but right off the bat, control the things you can control. Look good, smell good, show who you are, and go from there.
The next comment is from Danny, and she shares, it's not a question, but a comment. Go out there and be strong. Be proud of who you are. If they don't like you, it's probably not because of the chair. I always say to the girls, once you go wheels, you won't go heels. Use your humor.
I like that. It's you are definitely go into it. You have to accept who you are. I think Danny is saying it right. You have to really find a way. If you can't do it right now, find a way. Be in therapy. Find therapy online right now, and find a way to accept who you are and what you're bringing into the relationship. I mean, get it. Yes, your wheelchair is an issue. It is. There's our issues about all the time, but every person comes into a relationship have baggages, and I don't know anybody who doesn't come into a relationship with a baggage. It's we all had baggage, and you just need to figure out what your baggage is and if you're going to accept it or not. And can you change your baggage? Being in a wheelchair, that's not something we can change. So you have to accept it and move forward with it. So good. Yeah, that's a great comment, Danny.
And Susan shares, I feel that establishing friendships and good social participation are important to sexuality. There are ways to engage in sex and equipment to help, but loneliness is an epidemic in this population. Getting out there and meeting someone through work, college, or recreation is often overlooked.
Yes, absolutely. Loneliness, and especially during this pandemic, my God, loneliness is like, being on Doctors on Demand, I literally could see 60, 80 patients a week if I wanted, because there's so much out there that people need to talk about being so isolated. So we're at the worst time to try to recommend you not to be lonely. But that being said, it is a huge pandemic that's never talked about. Depression, anxiety that comes with that. When one of the things we notice that when you are newly injured and they get you involved with sports like I did and many of my friends who got involved in sports right away afterwards, and it made me realize that, wow, life still goes on, and having people around you and that are positive helped. So you need to surround yourself with both able-bodied people and people with disabilities, because it's really important that you're not the only one. And unfortunately, I didn't do that very well for many years. I was, being that I worked and I was always away from rehabs at a distance, that I never had a lot of people that were in wheelchairs. Although I've always kept contact with a few of them that I call regularly and to communicate. And so absolutely avoid the loneliness. You know, you can meet a lot of different people as well, and hopefully establish some good intimate relationships. So
It looks like that's all of the questions that have come in so far. If anyone else has any questions that they would like to ask Dr. Chang, please place it into the Q&A.
okay, what I would like to do is I think we can talk a little bit about our closing thoughts. How's that? We have, again, I don't want to go into too many more questions. Closing thoughts are is that we are a social animal, as you've always heard, that it's important that you have people around you that cares about you, that are interested in you and your well-being. You cannot have those individuals without you taking the first, it's a weird word to say, first step, but your first step to move in that direction. I believe you can't have really healthy relationships unless you really know yourself. So it's really important you fix yourself. It's really important that you understand your own issues. By having a good grasp of that, then you can go on and share that personality with someone else. So it starts with you. It starts with, ground zero, and then work yourself way out. But those who are afraid to be rejected, you have to get over that. You have to get over that fear of isolation. You have to really put yourself, are you going to get rejected? Absolutely. Are they going to reject you because of your disability? Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, they sometimes don't tell you that till later on, after you've fallen in love with them. Should you not put yourself out there? Oh my God, yeah, you're gonna go. You're scared. You're tired of being rejected. But what's the other consequence if you don't put yourself out there? You are going to be isolated and lonely. So you need to put yourself out there. You need a date. You need to find people. Are there places that are more apt to be comfortable with you? Yeah, people work in rehab. People who work in healthcare. They tend to be a little more understanding, sensitive to your wheelchair and look beyond who you are. But you do need to put yourself out there in the right place. You need to have an attractive personality. Find a way to do that. Find a way to laugh. Find a way to smile. Find a way to, do you need to overcompensate? I believe, in my opinion, yes. Yes, because you have to overcompensate for what you don't bring in, which is physical ability. Now, again, some paras, now don't get me wrong, I'm a quad. There's not a lot of physical things that I can do personally. There's a lot of quads who can do a lot more. But if you're a para, and everything's relative, I'm like, oh my God, look at what individuals with paraplegics can do, man. They bump up and down steps. They do almost everything. And then they probably look at people with incomplete who can walk. And so everything's all relative. But you are still having to overcompensate for some of that inadequacy. Okay. But ultimately, if you find a partner and you're committed to them and they're committed to you and you're able to communicate, then you're going to develop some sense of love and intimacy, which will progress into sexuality through communication and experimentation. We're probably not in a good group of people to do Tinder and things like that, where you just hook up with people. That's probably scary. And I don't even know how even to consult someone who wants to live that type of lifestyle. But I wanted to, so those are my closing thoughts. I want to thank you for allowing me to continue to bring a topic to you every month. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what you want me to talk about. Let the foundation know that what you're interested in. If what I'm bringing makes sense to you, let us know. Also, we're hoping that our next talk will be talk about careers, vocation, and financial stability. Maybe we'll progress into that topic next. So thank you again. This is Dr. John, living well, and I hope you have a great few weeks. Bye-bye.